It's 2 a.m. and your phone lights up. Maybe it's a text that says nothing important. Maybe it's a like on a photo you posted 11 hours ago. Maybe it's just him showing up online, active, present, when the rest of the world has gone quiet. And your stomach does that thing, that little flip, that wait, does this mean something feeling? If you've ever laid awake wondering why the person who pulled away from you during the day suddenly seems to reach for you at night, this video is for you. Because there is a pattern here, a real one. Not wishful thinking, not overanalyzing, an actual psychological pattern that shows up again and again with avoidant attachment styles. And once you understand it, you'll never look at a 2 a.m. text the same way again. I want to be honest with you before we go any further. This isn't going to be one of those videos that tells you he's secretly obsessed with you or that he's lying awake sobbing into his pillow because he misses you so much. That's not what this is. What this is a look at the actual behavioral signals that tend to show up when someone with an avoidant attachment style is quietly, often unconsciously, missing a connection they pushed away. Because avoidants don't miss people the way you do. They don't miss people the way most securely attached or anxiously attached people do. Their missing looks different. It's quieter. It's more indirect. And a lot of the time, it happens exactly when their guard is lowest, which is late at night, when the noise of the day has faded and the defenses they use to keep people at a distance start to slip. So let's talk about what that actually looks like. 3 signs, real ones, and I'm going to walk you through the psychology behind each one. So you're not just collecting behaviors like tea leaves, you're actually understanding what's happening underneath. Let's start with the first one, and it's probably the most common. He reaches out with something low stakes. Not "I miss you," not "I've been thinking about us," nothing that requires vulnerability. Instead, it's a meme. It's a song that reminds him of something. It's a, "Hey, saw this and thought of you." It's liking an old photo. It's watching your story the second you post it at an hour when nobody else is watching stories. It's small. It's almost forgettable. And that's exactly the point. Here's what's happening underneath that behavior. Avoidant attachment develops, in most cases, as a coping mechanism. Somewhere along the way, usually early in life, this person learned that closeness came with a cost. Maybe it was inconsistency from a caregiver. Maybe it was an environment where emotional needs weren't met. Or worse, were met with criticism or dismissal. Maybe they learned that depending on someone left them disappointed, so the safest move was to depend on no one at all. Over time, this turns into a deep, often unconscious belief that intimacy equals danger. Not danger in the dramatic sense, but danger in the sense of losing control, losing independence, being seen too closely, being needed, or needing someone back. So when an avoidant person actually does miss you, and I want to be clear, they can and often do feel that longing. It creates a conflict. Part of them wants to reach out, wants to reconnect, wants to feel that warmth again. But another part of them, the protective part, immediately flags that desire as dangerous. That protective part says, if you reach out directly, if you say "I miss you," if you're vulnerable, you're opening the door to being hurt again, to being controlled, to losing yourself in someone else's needs. So what happens is a compromise. The nervous system finds a loophole. They reach out, but in a way that doesn't cost them anything emotionally. A meme costs nothing. A like costs nothing. A thought of you text with no follow-up costs nothing. It lets them scratch the itch of connection without opening themselves up to the vulnerability that real closeness requires. And notice the timing, late at night, because during the day, their defenses are fully staffed. They're busy, they're distracted, they're performing independence, sometimes for themselves as much as for anyone watching. But at night, when the day's demands fall away, when they're alone with their thoughts, the walls get thinner. This is actually well documented in attachment research, not just in relationships, but in general emotional regulation. Our capacity for self-control and emotional suppression is finite, and it depletes over the course of the day. By the time it's late, the part of the brain responsible for maintaining that "I don't need anyone" narrative is tired. What surfaces instead is what was there underneath the whole time. So if you've noticed a pattern of small, low-effort, almost nothing contact that seems to cluster late at night, that's not random. That's the sound of someone's guard slipping. Just slightly, just long enough for something honest to slip through. Let me give you a picture of what this actually looks like in real life, because I think it helps to see it laid out instead of just described in theory. Say you dated someone for 8 months. It ended, maybe not dramatically, maybe just a slow fade, where he stopped putting in effort, and eventually you both stopped calling it a relationship. Weeks go by, radio silence. You've mostly stopped checking your phone every 5 minutes, which good, that's progress. Then one night, close to 2 a.m., you get a notification. He liked a photo from 4 months ago. Not a new post, an old one, something he had to scroll to find. Now, think about what that actually requires. Scrolling back through your profile takes intention. It's not something that happens by accident while someone's mindlessly swiping. Somewhere in that moment, he was thinking about you, enough to go looking, but not enough or not brave enough to send an actual message saying so. The like is the compromise. It says, I was here, I was thinking of you, without saying anything that could be read as an opening for a real conversation, without saying anything that requires him to sit in the discomfort of a response, without saying anything that could be perceived as needing you. This is why so many women describe this exact behavior as confusing rather than comforting. Because on one hand, it feels like a sign. It feels like proof that he hasn't fully let go. And on the other hand, it's maddening. Because if he really felt something, why not just say it? Why the workaround? Why the code instead of the message? The answer is that for someone with avoidant patterns, directness feels riskier than the workaround. A direct message, I miss you, I've been thinking about you, I regret how things ended, carries weight. It invites a response. It creates the possibility of a real conversation, which creates the possibility of real closeness, which is exactly the thing his nervous system has been trained to treat as dangerous. The like, the meme, the random song link, these things let him express something true while keeping an exit available. If you don't respond, he can tell himself it didn't matter anyway. If you do respond, he still hasn't committed to anything. It's a low-risk probe, not a real reach. Now, I need you to sit with something important here, because this is where a lot of women get stuck and start spiraling in the wrong direction. This sign does not mean he's about to change. It does not mean he's about to show up and tell you he made a mistake. It does not mean the relationship is coming back. What it means is that on an emotional level, some part of him still feels something for the connection you had. That's all. It's information, not a promise. And what you do with that information matters more than the information itself, which we'll come back to at the end. Let's move to the second sign, and this one is a little more layered because it involves what he does not do as much as what he does. The second sign is inconsistency in his distance, specifically distance during the day that softens or disappears at night. Let me paint the picture, because I know a lot of you are nodding along already. During the day, he's unavailable, short replies, if any, slow response times, a kind of flatness in his tone, like he's talking to a coworker instead of someone he used to be close to. Maybe he doesn't initiate at all. Maybe when you do talk, the conversation feels careful, guarded, like he's holding something back on purpose. But then it gets late and something shifts. He texts first. His responses come faster. There's a warmth in his tone that wasn't there 12 hours earlier. Maybe he asks a question that shows he was actually paying attention to something you said weeks ago. Maybe he brings up an inside joke. Maybe he just says, "You up?" But the way he says it feels different than a random check-in. This inconsistency, cold by day, warmer by night, is one of the clearest behavioral fingerprints of avoidant attachment in motion. And here's why it happens the way it does. I've talked to so many women who describe this exact whiplash and don't have language for it. So they end up blaming themselves. They think, maybe I'm reading too much into a normal text, or maybe I'm the one being inconsistent since I react differently depending on how he shows up. But you're not inconsistent for responding to inconsistency. You're having a completely normal reaction to a genuinely confusing pattern. Two versions of the same person showing up at different hours with a noticeably different emotional temperature is disorienting by design, even if it isn't intentional on his part. Avoidant attachment isn't really about not caring. That's the biggest misconception people have, and it's one I want to correct clearly, because I think a lot of women walk away from these relationships believing they simply weren't loved, weren't wanted, weren't enough. That's often not true, and it's not fair to you to carry that belief if it isn't accurate. What's actually happening with a lot of avoidant partners is an internal push-pull. They want closeness. Biologically, emotionally, most humans do. But closeness also triggers their threat response. So the daytime version of them, the version interacting with a colleague, a friend, an ex, you, in a normal daylight context where they feel exposed and observed, is the version running the suppression system at full power. They're managing the relationship the way someone manages a task they're anxious about, efficiently, at arm's length, minimizing engagement to minimize risk. But at night, alone, away from any sense of being watched or evaluated, the pressure to perform independence drops. There's no one to prove anything to, no audience for the "I'm fine, I don't need this" persona. And in that private, unmonitored space, what tends to surface is closer to what they actually feel, not what they've trained themselves to project. This is actually consistent with a broader psychological pattern called downregulation under low arousal states. During the day, when there's more stimulation, more social requirements, more cognitive load, avoidant individuals rely heavily on distancing strategies, keeping busy, staying task-focused, minimizing emotional engagement, because these strategies require active effort to maintain. At night, when stimulation drops and the nervous system settles, the emotional content that was being suppressed has more room to surface because there's simply less competing for their attention. So when you see someone who is distant, dismissive, almost cold during business hours, but noticeably softer, more present, more himself late at night, what you're witnessing is the gap between his defended self and his actual internal state. The daytime version is armor. The nighttime version, at least in flashes, tends to be closer to the truth. Again, I want to pump the brakes here before this starts to feel like a green light. This pattern being real doesn't mean it's healthy, and it definitely doesn't mean it's sustainable. A relationship built on someone only being emotionally available for you in small late-night windows is not a relationship built on security. It's a relationship built on scraps of a person's true self, offered only when the risk feels low enough. That's not the same as him choosing you. That's him occasionally letting his guard down around you, which is different. And I think it's important you know the difference, because one of those things you can build a future on, and the other one will keep you stuck in a loop of hoping the nighttime version becomes the full-time version. It rarely does on its own. Now let's get into the third sign, and this one tends to be the one that confuses women the most, because on the surface, it looks like the opposite of missing someone. The third sign is over-explaining or justifying his distance, unprompted, usually late at night. This shows up in different ways. Maybe he sends a text that starts with, "Sorry I've been distant, work has just been a lot." Maybe he says, "I know I haven't reached out, it's not about you." Maybe in a late night conversation, he suddenly, without you asking, starts explaining why he needed space, why he pulled back, why things got quiet on his end. The key detail here is that you didn't ask, he volunteered it. Here's why this matters so much psychologically. Avoidant individuals are often deeply uncomfortable with the idea of hurting someone, especially someone they were genuinely close to, even while their actions are, in fact, causing hurt. There's frequently a disconnect between their behavior and their self-image. Many avoidants see themselves as reasonable, fair, non-dramatic people, and the guilt that creeps in when they sense they've caused pain doesn't usually show up as an apology in the traditional sense. It shows up as justification, as explanation, as a kind of preemptive defense against a conversation they're afraid of having, and also underneath that, as a genuine attempt to soften the impact of their distance, even if they can't bring themselves to say, "I miss you," or "I handled this badly." I want to give you a real-world version of this too, because it's easy to nod along in theory and harder to recognize in the moment. Imagine you haven't spoken in 9 days. Then at 1:47 a.m., a text arrives. "Hey, I know I've been off the grid, work's been insane, and honestly, I've just been in my head a lot. Wasn't about you." No question attached, no invitation to respond, just an explanation dropped into the silence, seemingly out of nowhere. Your instinct might be to read that message purely as an update on his schedule, but notice what it actually accomplishes emotionally. It closes a loop he created but never acknowledged. It preemptively answers a question he assumes you've been asking yourself: "Does this have something to do with me?" And it does that without him having to ask how you're doing, without him opening a conversation he's not ready to have, without him risking a response that might require more vulnerability than he's prepared to offer at that moment. It's damage control, delivered on his terms, at the 1 hour of the day when delivering it feels survivable to him. unprompted justification is actually a very telling sign because it means he's been thinking about how his absence is landing on you. People don't explain themselves to those they've stopped caring about. If he genuinely didn't care how his silence affected you, there would be no reason to address it at all. Indifference doesn't reach out to clarify itself. Indifference just continues. The fact that some part of him feels compelled to soften the blow, to offer context, to make sure you don't read his distance as total abandonment, tells you that his internal experience of the situation is more conflicted than his behavior on the surface suggests. And notice again the timing. These messages rarely come at 2 p.m. during a lunch break when he's surrounded by colleagues and easily distracted. They tend to arrive late when he's alone with the discomfort of knowing he's hurt someone, and the daytime distractions that usually let him avoid that discomfort have run out. So to summarize the psychology behind all three of these signs, because I think it's worth tying together, avoidant attachment isn't the absence of feeling, it's the suppression of feeling in service of self-protection. During the day, when there's an audience, when there's a task to perform, when independence needs to be visibly maintained, that suppression runs strong. At night, when the day's demands fade and the nervous system settles, the suppression weakens, and what surfaces are small, often indirect signals: low-stakes contact, warmth that wasn't there 12 hours earlier, unprompted explanations for behavior that was never explained in daylight. None of these signs, on their own or even together, mean he's ready to change, ready to come back, or ready to give you the relationship you actually want and deserve. What they tell you is something narrower and, honestly, something a lot of you already sensed: that his distance during the day is not the full picture of what he feels. There is more happening underneath than what he's showing you in daylight hours. But here's the part I really want you to hear, because I think it's the part that gets lost in videos like this. Knowing that someone misses you in some quiet, suppressed 2 a.m. kind of way is not the same as that person being capable of giving you consistent love. Attachment styles aren't destiny. People absolutely can grow, can become more secure, can learn to tolerate the vulnerability that closeness requires. But that growth takes real, sustained effort. It takes self-awareness. It usually takes some kind of intentional work, whether that's therapy, whether that's a genuine period of self-reflection, whether that's a relationship where they finally feel safe enough to lower the walls during the day. Not just after midnight when no one's watching. It does not happen automatically just because he sent you a meme at 2 a.m. So if you're in a place right now where you're recognizing these signs in someone, where you're seeing the late night softness, the small low stakes reach outs, the unprompted explanations, I want you to hold two things at the same time. The first is validation. You are not imagining it. You are not crazy for noticing a pattern, because the pattern is real, and now you understand the psychology behind why it exists. The second thing, and this one is just as important, is that noticing his internal conflict is not your job to resolve for him. You cannot love someone into becoming secure. You cannot text back fast enough, or be patient enough, or be understanding enough to bypass the deep, often years in the making work that avoidant attachment requires to actually heal. That work belongs to him if he chooses to do it. Let me also address something that comes up a lot in the comments on videos like this, because I think it deserves a direct answer instead of being glossed over. Some of you are going to watch this and think, okay, so if I just wait long enough, if I just give him enough space during the day and stay available at night, eventually the nighttime version becomes permanent, right? I understand why that feels logical. It doesn't usually work that way, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I let you believe otherwise. The reason it doesn't work that way is that the daytime version of him isn't an act he's putting on for fun. It's a coping strategy that's been reinforced, sometimes for decades, by real experiences that taught him closeness isn't safe. Waiting patiently for the nighttime version to take over isn't the thing that resolves that. If anything, a pattern where you're available and accommodating during his distant daytime hours and then rewarded with warmth at night can actually reinforce the exact behavior you're hoping will change. It teaches him that he can keep the daytime distance without consequence, because the closeness is still there waiting for him whenever he wants to access it. That's not a foundation for him becoming more secure. That's a foundation for a relationship where you do all the emotional labor of staying steady while he does none of the work of showing up consistently. Real change in someone with avoidant attachment tends to happen under different conditions than most people expect. It usually requires him to feel the natural consequences of his distance, not be shielded from them. It requires him to sit with the discomfort of potentially losing something that matters to him, rather than being reassured that it'll always be there. And it requires, more than anything else, his own willingness to look at why closeness feels unsafe to him in the first place, which is internal work no one else can do on his behalf, no matter how patient, understanding, or available they are. I say all of this not to discourage you, but because I think a lot of relationship content out there sells hope without honesty, and I'd rather give you something you can actually use. Recognizing these 3 signs is genuinely valuable. It helps you understand that his behavior is more layered than simple indifference. And for a lot of you, that understanding brings real relief because you've spent months wondering if you imagined a connection that clearly meant nothing to him. Now, it likely did mean something. But meaning something to him and being ready to build something real with you are 2 very different situations. And confusing the 2 is where a lot of women lose months, sometimes years, waiting for a version of him that only shows up in small, safe, late-night doses. What you can do, and what I'd encourage you to focus your energy on, is protecting your own peace while this plays out. That might mean not organizing your emotional life around when his next 2 a.m. text arrives. That might mean recognizing these signals for what they are, information about his internal state, without letting that information pull you back into a cycle of waiting, hoping, and analyzing every notification. You deserve a version of someone that shows up for you consistently in daylight, with people around, in the moments that require real presence, not just the quiet hours when it's safe for him to feel something without having to act on it. If this resonated with you, if you've lived this exact pattern, I want you to comment below and tell me which of these 3 signs hit closest to home for you: the low-stakes reach out, the daytime distance that softens at night, or the unprompted explanations. And if you're someone who's trying to figure out whether what you're experiencing is a pattern worth understanding more deeply, or whether it's time to start protecting yourself from a cycle that isn't serving you, make sure you're subscribed, because we go deep into exactly this kind of relationship psychology every week, breaking down not just what avoidant partners do, but why they do it. And more importantly, what you can do to build the kind of secure, consistent love you actually deserve. Because understanding him is useful, but choosing yourself, that's the part that actually changes your life.